everyone, happy Easter. Hop on over into this podcast. I hope it's going to be excellent. And it's not just another Good Friday, but it's going to be a great day. So make sure you don't pass over this episode as you are waiting to celebrate this weekend. I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
And you're welcome. This is TV, guys, as you know. Hopefully you are having a great week, and hopefully you're going to have a great Easter. I hope that the weather is going to be wonderful. We're in the past still, and the weather is great right now, so we're hoping it's going to stay that way.
You know what this is, Matt?
What is this?
This is just the introduction before we blow your mind, because this is TV, guys, and we do it all the time. So sit your booty on the floor or in a chair, ground, or in the air. Just don't go. That's my way of saying I got Paramount Plus, and I've been watching a lot of all that.
There you go. What have I been watching? Oh, I haven't been watching as much TV because the Oscar nominations just got released. And I'm like, well, now I've got to watch all these movies that I've never heard of across all these different streaming sites. So I'm getting caught up on that. Plus, Zack Snyder's Justice League just came out too. And that's like 4 hours of your life that you have to commit to. So
you're watching critically acclaimed movies, and I'm watching a sketch show from the 90s.
Exactly. See, it all evens out. You know, I'm all high art, and you're all like, stick your weenie in a chair.
Not surprised me if that happened on the show.
Man, I used to like watch all those Nick shows, and I remembered all of those like the theme songs. But I can't remember. There's so many right now that I can't remember for the life of me. Like Salute Your Shorts. I can't remember for the life of me how it goes. I just remember in the middle of like the theme song, one of the problem kids, if you will, like yells out this something inappropriate for a PG show, and the counselor's like, "Hey, watch it!" And like that's in every single theme song episode, or every single episode in the theme song.
I never really watched that one. I watched most of the Nick shows, but it's so crazy when I'm watching this, and I got to the episode where Amanda Bynes joins the cast, and it just really dates it because she's like a 9-year-old kid. I'm like, dang, this is forever ago.
Yeah, it's funny to go back. There's so many of those that it's like I wonder really how well did it hold up. I mean, I'm planning probably to watch if I get Paramount Plus, which I don't think I will, but the Nickelodeon nostalgia factor is calling to me. I'd want to watch Are You Afraid of the Dark and be like, now was this really creepy, or was this just like because I was 12 and I didn't know better?
Well, now one too, it might depend on the episode. They might probably have some that might be creepy and some that are just hokey.
Yeah, there's some stuff is like, how did we watch this as kids? Or like the artwork for the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books. Like, who thought that artwork would be okay for kids? Like, sure, we're gonna scare kids, but look, this is like gonna haunt your nightmares for the rest of your life.
For real.
But we're not talking about scary things. We're not even talking about happy things. We're talking about sad things. We're talking about TV's top 3 saddest moments. And let me tell you guys, this is hard. It's hard to narrow it down to 3. That I don't have any This Is Us on here because This Is Us is one of those shows that it's like every week it has something that makes you want to cry. But for me, I can't think of like one moment and I'm like, this is such a pinnacle sad moment. I'm like, there's just every week it's something.
2 out of my 3 are shows like this. This show doesn't do this. This is not a sad type show. Like, what's happening?
Yeah, I'd say 1.5 of mine are, and the half will make sense later. But there's one that really. Yeah. What I like about shows like that is I really like when it's a comedic show and it's just like out of the blue, because that kind of hits harder, you know, like talking about This Is Us, you expect that from This Is Us. So, you know, when it's sad, you're like, okay, this is great. And it's a nice episode, but you don't like stick in your brain the same way that some of these comedies, it's like, wait, what the heck? Are you serious? Yeah. Like this isn't on my list, but I remember the episode of All in the Family, like that old classic show that really, they didn't do this a whole lot, but there was one episode where they actually had Edith, the
where she gets assaulted
wife. Yeah, she gets assaulted, or she like escapes it. Yeah. But I mean, it's still like she's really close to it. And so like that episode was really heavy. And I think like because it was in front of a live studio audience, they didn't know how to react. Like they all are clapping at the end. Where it's like, no, she just had a PTSD episode when the cop is talking to her about what happened. Like, you don't clap in that.
Yeah,
because it was so uncommon for this is what these shows did, and so the audience I don't think knew how to react and what to do.
Exactly. Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of All in the Family, but I knew that I know about that episode.
Yeah, All in the Family's pretty good. It's got Rob Reiner as a main character in it. Rob Reiner before he was like the big director.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's start with your number 3. What is the number 3 saddest TV moment?
My number 3 is probably a more expected one. I'm going to be going to Scrubs. And I have a feeling Matt might be talking about Scrubs at some point, but I'm going to talk about, I don't have an episode title, but it's in season 3. It's the one where Ben dies. It's the one where Ben is the character played by Brendan Fraser.
Yeah, they do like 2 different fake outs with Ben at different points, and both of the fake outs are really good. Like the first one where, this wasn't in season 3. The first one, I remember what season that was when they first been.
I think it was even 1.
But it's like they play out this episode, and Ben, Brendan Fraser's character, Ben, he is diagnosed with leukemia, or they think he has like a leukemia scare. And they're like, well, I don't know. Is this because he's Dr. Cox's good friend? Like, is he going to be okay? And then like the episode plays out, and it's like, oh, he got better. He's went out of the hospital. And then we find out like that little happy ending was in JD's head, and he didn't actually get better, and he actually did have leukemia.
Yeah.
And it was a nice little turn on its head that they did.
Yeah. So to get some context, as you said, he's Dr. Cox's friend, and Dr. Cox is like the jaded, tough guy, like doesn't show emotions. Like he's great at his job, but he just is like very hardened. And this is like technically it's his ex-wife's brother, but it's like his best friend. Like it's someone who he is very close with. Throughout the episode, or midway through the episode, I didn't rewatch it, but I think I remember the beats, is that you're led to believe that another patient that JD and Dr. Cox have been working on died. And they're kind of dealing with that throughout the thing. And at the same time, Dr. Cox had been talking about his son's birthday party going on. And throughout this, Ben had been hanging around, just kind of being goofy and fun and hanging out with Dr. Cox. And they're at the park, and you think it's for Dr. Cox's son's birthday. And he's saying, well, aren't you going to be taking some pictures of people saying happy birthday to my son and all this kind of stuff? And then camera turns, and you don't see, all of a sudden Brendan Fraser disappears, and it's just JD. And it's just this line, where do you think we are? And you realize they're not at a park, they're at a cemetery. And it had been Ben who had died all along. And throughout the episode after that point, Ben wasn't actually there. He was just kind of in Dr. Cox's imagination as like a coping mechanism, and then realized that they're at Ben's funeral and that Ben died. And Dr. Cox has to sit there, and he just sits there silently, but he conveys so much emotion just with the tears on his face as everybody else is going by, and realizing this is a huge moment for his character.
Yeah. Yeah, that was such a great like sucker punch moment. Mm-hmm. Fun fact too. I'm talking about the guy that died at the beginning that we thought was another patient. That actually was played by the guy who ended up being the Dr. Taub on House MD.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So yeah, with that episode, I like Scrubs does such a great job of navigating between silly and its serious stuff. It doesn't have a ton of serious moments. It probably has like a handful each season, but overall it's mainly a comedy. It's a silly show. And so when it takes the time, it really does a good job of taking the time and doing things right. And this is one of those examples. And a lot of people have said this is the best like emotional beat in the show. Personally, I like another one better that, spoiler alert, we're talking about. Yeah. And so
there's a few.
So I have no qualms with your pick.
Yeah. Well, I just read part of it is like you said, throughout the episode, you don't realize you're in a big episode because, I mean, yes, a patient died, but a lot of times, I mean, it's a medical show. That's going to be part of the job, part of the show. And you're not realizing how close to home it hits until JD has that line of where do you think we are? And it's like, if it's on your first rewatch, that's kind of a kind of moment.
Yeah. Yeah. It's well, like I said, they do a great job of playing the beat, in how they wrote it and how they directed and film it, where like you get to have the realization as the camera shows you what's going on, and they take their time with it so that you can be like you can cope with what's happening yourself.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so Matt, what's your number 3?
My number 3 is also a medical show. Now, this I haven't watched all the episodes of this show. I watched like halfway through. It's still on the air. It's Grey's Anatomy. I've watched through a number of seasons. I probably got 8 seasons in, maybe 9. I don't remember exactly how many. But at a certain point, I'm like, I'm just no longer invested in these characters. So I ended up not watching it past a certain season. But there was one season, one episode that really the dramatic moment stuck with me. And what's funny is like it's not even about a main character. It's these two, like what the episode is about. It's this guest star and his kid. And so the episode is season 5, episode 20, called Sweet Surrender. And there's a dad who has his daughter there, and his daughter, they find out, is terminal and she's going to die. And she's young. She's like 5 to 7 age. And so the dad, so he's spending all this time trying to change his daughter's fate and accepting, because, you know, the hospital themselves are saying, hey, we're not going to be able to do anything. All we can do is make her comfortable. And he's like, I can't live with that. So he's spending this time, and he finally finds like this hospital in Mexico that would admit her, and they're like, well, we need to get her down there. The entire time, one of the characters, Miranda, is waiting on him and helping out, and she's trying to help him cope with it. And she's like with the daughter too, and like holding her as she's sleeping, and etc. And there gets to be a point where she's like, we can try and do some other things, and if she dies, like that, we can restart her heart and we can keep bringing her back. But she's like, it's the moment right now. She needs her dad. Like, I could be the one that is here and helping and comfort her while you're trying to get her to Mexico. But you're going to miss this. You want to be here for this final moment. You don't want to let it slip. So he gets into the bed with his daughter and is holding her. And she's like, are we going to go to Mexico? And he's like, yeah. And he starts like describing Mexico. And he's just like, oh, it's got these great skies and plenty of trees. And so he's just like telling her what it's going to be like when they go down there together. And she dies as he's telling her that stuff. And then he's just like starts crying, of course, because he lost his daughter. But I really loved how it handled that. It's like, stop trying to save her. You like just be there with her and walk her from this life into death. It's a really heartbreaking and sad moment, and it stuck with me, especially because, you know, like you probably heard a lot of people have said this, like, well, when you have kids, you can understand some of this. And I don't think they're saying that in like you don't have the emotional capacity to understand what that pain would feel like without kids, but you're able to put your mind into like relating, like, this is my kid. If my kid was this way, how would I feel? And so that's what I was doing when I was watching that episode. I was just like, if this was my kid, like I'd be dead. I'd be a wreck. So
I haven't seen that show, but even just hearing you describe it, I could kind of see where it was going as you were talking. I'm like, dang, that, like, why do shows have to hit that hard? Because that's life.
You know? Yeah. Grey's Anatomy did a good job with some emotional beats and had some good stuff. There's a reason I watched it for like 8 seasons, but it's just too long. It went on too long.
I've still never seen any of Grey's Anatomy.
It's fine. It's not a show that at this point I'm like, because it's gone so much, I'm like, I wouldn't say you should start it, but if you do, well, you'll probably need a little bit of it.
I'm not going to rule it out, but it's not likely.
Yeah.
All right. So my number 2 is another one of these shows that doesn't normally go this hard. Would you be surprised if I said we're going to Sesame Street?
I know, because I know which one you're talking about. I wouldn't have guessed that that's the one we're talking about. Right. It.
So Sesame Street, you know, they have the Muppet characters, you know, Big Bird, Ernie, Bert, all them. They also have the human cast, you know, Gordon, Maria, Bob, all them. So one of the original human cast members, this is before our time even, but way back in 1969 when it started, was Mr. Hooper, this older guy who ran Hooper Store, which is still on Sesame Street to this day. And the actor who played Mr. Hooper, Will Lee, died in, I just looked up the year, 1982. So early 80s, he died, and he had been on that show at that point for almost 15 years.
Wow, Sesame Street is that old?
Sesame Street is 52 years old.
Holy crap.
Yeah. So in 1982, the actor died, and they figured, you know, it's a kid's show. They could have easily just not talked about him or replaced him, but they figured, no, we're going to use this as a learning tool. So what they did was they had the scene where it's just Big Bird and all the human adult actors. None of the other kids or other Muppets are there because it's kind of a more serious moment. And Big Bird comes in with all these pictures he drew of all the human characters, which I think were actually drawn in real life by Carol Spinney, who was Big Bird, which is kind of a cool detail.
Nice.
And he gets down to the last one. He's like, "This is Mr. Hooper's," and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, that's so great! It looks just like him." And he's like, "Well, yeah, I want to give it to him." And then the tone just drops, and everyone's like, "Well, Big Bird, we told you he died." I was like, "Oh yeah, well, I'll just give it to him when he gets back." And they have to have this talk with him, like, "Well, you don't get to come back when you die." And it's kind of, they use the moment to explain to Big Bird and to kids watching, about death and about what that means. And have this moment about, well, who's gonna make my birdseed milkshakes? Who's gonna tuck me in? Who's gonna, and talk about how he's sad, and everyone's tearing up. And this is part of what made it on the list, is that obviously those are real tears, because this is a real guy who actually died, who they've been working with for years. And so they're really processing their own grief. And I think Carol Spinney had said that you couldn't see, but he was tearing up too inside the Big Bird costume. And just realizing, like, kind of, they're all going to be there for Big Bird. They're like, "Hey, we're still going to tuck you in. We're still going to be there for you and look after you. And, we miss him too, but we can still remember him." And it's I think it was very well done for a show that didn't have to even deal with it at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that really adds, real quick, one thing I'll say is I think it adds when you've got shows that it's easy to act. For instance, like finales. It's really easy for the actors to be sad and portray sadness because it actually is ending in real life. And I don't have a finale on my list. I've got some as my honorable mentions, but I think that might be one reason why those don't make it as much. But you're able to still cry a little bit more in a finale because you see someone actually crying, and it's not acting. That there's more going on, and so that really adds to a layer. But then the other thing for them to do that, like, I know that if you watched some Mr. Rogers, his like documentary, like, he'll do stuff that he doesn't have to do, sort of thing, for kids shows that no one expects kids shows to go to a level that sometimes they go to. And so for Sesame Street to take that moment and to actually allow it to play out, that's really impressive.
And I like when kids shows don't completely dumb down. Like, obviously it's got to be like appropriate and keep kids' attention and all that. I get that, but at the same time, you can have more of a substance than just, "This is the color yellow,"
Yeah, absolutely. Like, who is the one that the kids watch on Hulu? Blippi, I think. There's like an adult who dresses up like kid, and he's just like, he's that way. It's like, all right, great, it keeps their attention, whatever, but he's no Mr. Rogers, that's for sure.
All right, that's all I got for my number 2.
All right, my number 2 is Futurama. You probably know what episode it is.
That's my number 1. Go ahead.
All right. Well, it is this is the one I think that you weren't going to have. Futurama does do this a couple times. They don't do it as frequently as Scrubs does, where we talked about that, but every now and then they've done an emotional thing. I like the episode with his brother when they find out of that, but that's not what this one is. This one is Jurassic Bark, which is episode 7 in season 4. And the episode is they discover the pizza place that Fry worked at back in 1999. And so they find that in ruins. They go down there, and as they're looking at this pizza place, they see like this fossilized dog. Mm-hmm. And Fry's like, "Wait, that's Seymour. That's the dog that, like," we find out through these flashbacks that it shows us that it's this dog that he really bonded with that didn't have a home. And so he would give it like free pizza and he'd take care of it. And like that dog was just so loyal to him. So, it was one of his bright spots in the 20th century. And, he didn't feel like he had too many people in that time. And so that dog was really like his best friend. Yeah. So then Farnsworth is like, "Well, we have a way that we could bring him back. We can take out the DNA. It would be a similar, like Jurassic Park. They pull the DNA out of the fossil, and then they're able to recreate that dog." So as he's doing that process at the end of the episode, it shows that it shows the DNA molecule and says his age was 15. Yep. And Fry's like, "Oh, he's 15? And like, you know what? I don't want to do this. Stop the procedure. I don't want to bring him back. And they're like, well, you were so excited to do this. He's like, yeah, but he lived to be 15. He lived his life. He had
They
a
say he
full
lived.
life without me.
They say he lived 12 years without Fry,
Yeah, there you go.
which is a
12
number
years
I'm yeah, which is a number I'm mad about. We'll get to that in a minute.
okay. So he's like, so I ended up like throwing the fossil into like this lava right there. I don't remember exactly why there was that accessible, but throws the dog in, and they don't bring him back. Well, at the end of the episode, it shows back in flashback, it shows Seymour waiting for Fry for those 12 years at that pizzeria. That he never forgot about Fry, and he would come back day in and day out, and he waited for Fry to come back for 12 years. And it's like, are you kidding me, show? That's not even fair.
No, like that's what they 12 years. You make us like everyone loves dogs, and this is clearly a sweet dog. This dog sat on a curb waiting for its owner for 12 years. Like, what the heck?
What is wrong with you?
This was not a situation where an actor died in real life. This is not a show like This Is Us where you expect it. This is a cartoon where like supposed to just have goofy stuff, and there's no outside show reason for them to make us feel things. I don't watch Futurama to feel things.
It's kind of like the Family Guy episode. I never watched it when that happened, but I saw clips of it, so I watched like the actual follow-up of it where like they killed Brian, and they did a similar thing where it's like they just do it out of the blue and they play the rest of the episode serious, although they end up bringing Brian back like 2 or 3 episodes later, and it ends up being stupid and sucks. Yeah. But it's like, why? You don't need to do it, but it resonates. And this episode, I do feel like it did it well, because yeah, it was a little mean of them to pull that out and to sucker punch us, but it was a really good story moment and really a nice point to hit that you didn't get from Futurama and other episodes.
Yeah, and I know Futurama isn't like a super popular show, but anyone listening to this, if you haven't watched Futurama, at least look up on YouTube the scene. Just look up Futurama, Seymour the dog, or Jurassic Park, and like I defy you not to like feel legitimately sad for this dog who had to spend 12 years not knowing why his best friend is suddenly gone.
Well, yeah, it's a good episode. But hey, Brian, I will give this to you. You can go ahead and use one of your honorable mentions right now and talk a little bit more in depth than you would have since I stole your number one.
All right. I'm debating. I'm going through my honorable mentions now. I think I'm going to have to land on. I have a Word document with just a little bit of notes, and it's for Criminal Minds, and I just put Spencer's life.
So we know over that I don't watch Criminal Minds, so I need a lot of detail here.
Okay, well, I'm going to focus on one moment, but I'm going to give you some highlights. For one point, he's gotten kidnapped, which they all have gotten kidnapped at some point. Throughout the series, he's also dealing with his mom suffering through Alzheimer's and having episodes throughout the whole series. Let's see, what else? Aubrey Plaza is a guest star and frames him for murder, and he spends half a season in jail. He meets a girl online. He's starting to have a love affair. She gets killed and murdered right in front of him, so that's not great. But I think one of the biggest ones, and this is actually due to Anna, and I asked Anna, what's some sad moments in TV? And she started talking about Spencer from Criminal Minds. Earlier, do you know who Paget Brewster is?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so she's one of the main characters throughout on and off. And at one point, her character, we think that she is killed off. And I think the audience knows that she's still alive, but she is actually alive. But most of the characters in the show, including Spencer, thinks that she's dead. And all of a sudden, I forget if it's later that season or if it's a couple of seasons later, there's something happens and she has to come out of hiding, and they have to announce to her that she's alive. And you find out that, and then another one of the characters, JJ, knew about it and had to help out with the cover-up this whole time. And Spencer is just wrecked by that. And he's being so passive-aggressive and short with JJ, even though they're usually very close. And you can tell he's really hurting about this. And when he finally opens up, he says, I came to your house for like 10 weeks crying about losing a friend that you knew was alive. And it's like, and you didn't trust me, you couldn't. And she was kind of in this point where she, because of the nature and the seriousness of her having to fake her death, couldn't tell him. But he's like, spent weeks and like months dealing with the fact of losing a friend of hers, losing a friend and coworker who he was close with, and this friend that he was confiding with and going through with his grief with knew the whole time that she was alive, that Emily was alive. And that just kind of felt like a huge betrayal to him. And he even said, like, I forget what the medication was. There's some kind of harmful medication. And he's like, if I had started taking that, would you have told me? And he's like, you didn't though. And he's like, yeah, but I thought about it. And it's just this really hard moment because these are two characters that don't normally fight. Normally, they're a really good team unit, and they go out and they find all the crazy people. Probably not the best PC term, but they find all the people who are harming other people, and they deal with it. And to see that rift in the team, and you kind of feel for both of them because the situation is just sucky. But it's just on top of everything else that happens to Spencer throughout the whole show. That's just a really rough moment for him.
I have nothing to add. You're describing his life, though. I'm like, oh, you mean John Locke? Like, it's sad when you have these characters as like that's their arc. Is like the writers are, well, we got to keep adding stuff to them. We got to keep attacking them. Like they do it jokingly for Toby on The Office, but it's like there's some characters. It's like every single thing that happens to them sucks. You feel so bad.
And like a lot of the characters in Criminal Minds have big tragedy throughout the show, and I could probably point to almost any character and point to a sad moment that could be for them. But Spencer is just like the kid cannot catch a break. Like every time he gets even some kind of love interest, like something's going to happen to her, and it's just crazy. So that's my honorable mention that bumped up to my one. Now that you stole Futurama, so you still got your number one, right?
I still have my number one. You bet. When we were talking about this at the beginning, I said that I had 1.5 shows that were usually didn't do serious. So Futurama like really didn't do serious. Scrubs, for the most part, didn't do serious, but I consider it like half because it does dip into serious a lot. Yeah. So one of the episodes for me that I absolutely loved and was like the most emotional moment for me in Scrubs, and this is my number one. So this episode is My Lunch from Scrubs season 5, episode 20. This episode is very JD and Cox centric. It's so weird. Okay, real quick, before it gets into the emotional part, it's kind of funny because like the scene right before the big emotional scene, the B plot of this episode was Todd like, am I gay? Am I straight? And then so like the last part of his little resolve is he's like hitting on every single person, man and woman, in the hallway. And the janitor's like, who the heck are you? He's like, I'm the Todd. And it's like, that's not my B story. I don't really care about Todd. You don't need to give him characterization.
The Todd would definitely get canceled today.
You would. It immediately goes from that into the emotional part. So the episode was they bump into this woman and they had previously waited on her and she was suicidal back when they had waited on her, but she was doing fine now. And so then she wanted to have lunch with them, but was like, well, we're not going to do that. So they kind of like brush her off a little bit. She ends up being in the hospital and she had attempted suicide. And like, we didn't catch the signs. We didn't see that she was but she had taken like pills or whatever, and so her organs are still fine. So there's these 3 patients that were waiting on organs that they needed them. One of them needed like a heart, one of them needed lungs, I think, and then one of them needed like a kidney or a pancreas or something. Not pancreas, but something that wasn't really that major. And so that guy was like Dr. Cox's friend, the one who needed something that wasn't really major. So anyway, she was an organ donor. So they take these organs and they put them in these other people. And then as the episode goes on, finds out she didn't actually die from her suicide attempt, or maybe she did, but she had rabies at the time. And so those organs were compromised. So then after that, they realize what's going on. And the person who needed the heart, that they died because that organ was compromised. The person who needed the lungs, they died because that organ was compromised. And then like Cox is sitting in the break room after those 2 died, and JD comes in, and JD has a moment to Cox where he kind of mentors him just a little bit and is like, it was a great moment for him, and Cox is clearly at a low point. And then of course their pager goes off. And as you would guess, it's Cox's friend who is after he got the new or whatever it was. So they're it immediately cuts to like a very frantic scene as Cox is trying to bring this guy back. He's flatlining, he's got the paddles and trying to bring him back. It's not working, and the guy's just flatlining dead on the table. And then Cox just like screams and like throws the cart, and he like just reaches that breaking point, and he starts leaving, and he bumps into JD, and he's like that he could have waited. Because one of the things JD said is like, it would have been irresponsible to wait for the proper test to come back before he did the organs. Like, they needed that heart, they needed that lung. And he was like, with him, he could have waited. He didn't need me to put that in. Yeah. And so it's like, it was my fault sort of thing. And he starts walking away, and JD's like, you walk away and you're not coming back. He's like, yeah, I know. And then he like leaves. And it's just like the lowest point I think we see for Dr. Cox in the series. And it's just very well done how it unfolds to get him to that point.
I think the line is actually is a callback, because I think Dr. Cox had said it to JD earlier. I think it was, once you start blaming yourself for things, there's no coming back. And then JD parrots his own words back to him, and Dr. Cox, like he says, just says, "You're right," and basically says, "Yes, like this is gonna hit me." And like Dr. Cox doesn't recover it after this. Yep. He spends a couple episodes just drowning in guilt.
Yeah. And that was one of the things that make this episode so good, is because himself with that woman that dies early on, because he didn't see the signs that she was suicidal still, and he missed it. Yeah. And so Cox gives him some mentorship and some advice, and it's great. And then JD's able to bring some of that same stuff back to him, but it doesn't quite work because it's Cox's own words, and he knows. He's like, I know these words. It doesn't do anything for me. I can't live with this.
Yeah. And I like when they humanize Cox. Like, he's at the beginning, his role is to be the veteran who knows what he's doing and will like help out the patients, but he will also just have the snark and the attitude and be like, well, I'm the guy. I know what's going on. But to have him also deal with this kind of stuff and they bring that humanity. Both of our picks revolve around Dr. Cox's emotions, and that's because it hits hard when he normally is just so guarded.
Yeah, he's got such high walls that if something gets through those walls, it's a really big something.
Yeah, like JD has emotional moments too, but it's not as surprising for JD to get to an emotional place.
Yeah, I mean, there's one early on where like there's a patient who dies, and like JD has a harder time about that patient dying than she does. It's like really his first in the first season. It's like one of his first deaths, and she's like, "I'm okay. Honestly, I've lived a good life. I've lived a long life, and I know you can prescribe dialysis and you can extend my life by a couple years." She's like, "But I don't want that. I don't want the rest of my life to be that. I'm okay with dying." And JD is not okay with that. And so she kind of has to help him and coach him through that death. And it's a nice moment. It's a nice episode. But it's not that same emotional impact that this one is.
Do you have anything else to say about that one?
Not about that one. Nope.
Do you want to just do a real quick firing round of some honorable mentions?
Sure. I didn't bring this up because we'd already talked about it not too long ago when we talked about finales, but I thought the MASH finale when Hawkeye's talking about that story that I was telling you about the woman in the van, or in the bus, that was a really well done thing. That's like that hits you and that pierces right. Yeah. So that was a great moment.
One that I have is when Paul, who's John Ritter's character in 8 Simple Rules, dies in the show, because that's one where they had to write it in because the actor actually died, and how how the family deals with suddenly the dad is gone. One of the biggest moments is throughout the episode. There's a school dance that's going on. They're debating if they're going to go, and Bridget, who is Kaylee Cuoco's character, ends up trying to leave with this like really skimpy, revealing red dress, and they're kind of like just being like, well, whatever she needs to do to pass her grief, and kind of like not really coming down on her. And she gets to the door and breaks into tears, and she's like, "Dad would have never let me get this far." And like that was an interesting moment, because they were purposely trying to like let her not come down on her because of the grief, and that ended up being like what she was seeking, and just how all three of the kids deal with the death in their own way. It's really a strong episode.
Oh. Yeah, it's tough. I remember when he died, I wasn't watching the show, and I still haven't seen the show, but I remember when he died. For me, another finale. We talked about this is Boy Meets World finale. I just love that final scene with them in the classroom with Mr. Feeney. That's a great scene. Really well acted by all four of those. All four of the actors in there.
Mm-hmm. I would say, well, Breaking Bad is another one of those shows, kind of like This Is Us, with so many moments. But I would say when Hank dies towards the end, because
I had thought of that. Yep.
Because even throughout this, like Walter White is just so in control throughout so much of his Breaking Bad, as the title of the show. But with Hank at the end, he never wanted Hank to die, and like in that moment, he's desperately trying to plead to these Nazi jerks who are about to kill him, and Hank's just like, they already decided they're going to kill me. Like, just do what you're going to do, and then boom, gunshot, and that's it. And it's just like, dang. Even for that show, that's a hard moment.
That episode, Ozymandias, is the best episode of television of any show ever. There was so much that was packed in that because they took their time leading to it, and the earlier seasons were slow. It just kind of the pace quickened and quickened and quickened. And what that is that, as you said, Walter was always in control, but you could always feel as the show went on that things are starting to slip out of his control. He'd be able to catch it and come back to being on top again, but it would like slowly get out of his control. And this was the moment when he was not in control at all. And he had finally lost like his A game. He was out of it, and now it was just about surviving.
Yeah, I gotta watch the show again, but I got too much stuff to watch.
Yeah, this one I had almost made my episodes just because we hadn't talked about this show too much. But there was an episode of Growing Pains, season 4, episode 20. I can't remember what it was called, but it featured a recurring character from Matthew Perry before he was on Friends. He played a character named Sandy, and he was a good friend of the daughter Carol. And so you also knew, though, that he had a drinking problem. And so in this episode, at the beginning of the episode, he's on a date with her, and he gets a little drunk. And she's like, all right, well, race tonight, and we'll see each other tomorrow. She stands him up for the date the next day, and Mike and Ben are teasing Carol, and because they have been teasing Sandy for a little bit, and so they're teasing her, and then she gets a call, and they're like actually videotaping. It was like, oh, we're gonna see what excuse he has, and like just joking around. He got in an accident on the way home. He got in a drunk driving accident. Mm-hmm. And so he's in the hospital, and they like immediately stop, like, oh my gosh, we're so sorry. So they go visit him in the hospital, and Carol's there, and he's like, this was a good wake-up call for me. I know I'm in trouble. I know I got a DUI, and I've got to face the music for it, but this was a really good wake-up call for me, and this is my opportunity at a second chance. Well, as she comes back home with her parents, they get home, and Mike's there, and he's like, because he's a teenager too, so he doesn't know how to do this well, but he's like, I got off the phone with the friend at the hospital, and they're like, well, what's going on? And he eventually is like, Sandy just died. And Carol does a really good job of acting this, and she just breaks down. And then after, like, there's like that silence as she's like crying, that she's like, Mike, that's the meanest joke you've ever done. Like convincing me that you're joking, sort of thing. And Mike doesn't also know how to handle it because, again, he's a teenager, and the parents, they're like, they have a good solemn presence. They're sad, but it's like they're kind of helping them start to process this, but they're still processing it themselves. Yeah. So it's a really great moment for those 4 actors. Just be like, how do we handle this news? And they all have different responses. And it's one of the things that really stood out so well about that episode is all 4 of them have something different that they're doing in their acting wise, and it all feels completely in line with their characters.
That sounds cool. I've only seen a little bit of Growing Pains.
It's a good show. It was Leonardo DiCaprio's first big role.
Yeah, I knew that much. Yeah. Another one I had was How I Met Your Mother, when Marshall's dad dies, and it's specifically when Marshall finds out he died, because throughout the whole episode, there's a countdown of different numbers you see hidden throughout the show. When it gets down to 1, Lily tells him that his dad died, and they didn't tell Jason Segel that that's what she was going to tell him. I think they told him that something else was going to be in the script, so that way they could get his real reaction to that news on camera.
Yeah, that's a really good moment. It was one of the ones that I'd thought of too. I liked how they did it with what you're saying, like that countdown, and you just didn't expect it. But they also had the dad in the episode so that like, you were ready for something with the dad because he kept calling, and then it's like, wait, they pulled the rug out from underneath you and he dies. It was a really, really nice way because it's like it also was so out of the blue. And he says, like, one of his last lines in the episode is like, I'm not ready for this. Yeah. And it really captures that no one's ever ready for death, even if you know it's coming and they're in the hospital. Even then, you're still not ready for it. But sometimes it's just so out of the blue that it catches you off guard.
Yeah. I think that's all the honorable mentions. Oh, see, there's obviously we can't go without mentioning the Fresh Prince episode where Will's dad leaves and he has that breakdown moment with Uncle Phil and why doesn't he want me? I feel like everybody, even you, have seen that scene.
That's one of those few scenes that is so good that they can convey so much emotion without having to be like someone's dying or the show's ending.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the few emotional moments I can think of on a show that stands out when it's not one of those qualifiers.
Exactly. And I don't know if Will Smith, I don't know if his dad left him in real life and he was pulling from real experience, but I wouldn't be surprised just because that's such a good moment.
Yeah. I think I remember hearing something that he was, but I don't want to speak for that without knowing for sure. I have a friend who he talks about that episode because that was the case for him. Not that his dad came back in and then left suddenly, but like that he didn't know his dad, and so it's kind of like that getting to put yourself in that spot of like, well, what's wrong with me that my dad doesn't want me? My final one here, I am not going to talk too much detail about it because I don't want to spoil it. It's still a most recent show, but that's from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and it's the only mention that I have of a main character dying. And so I'm not going to say who it is, but at the end of season 5, one character dies, and you're like, no, not that one. I really liked that character. That wasn't fair for you to. This actor was so. Yeah, this actor was so good in how they did it because they were like pinned by something, and there was like this huge. Like this building got shaken and shit, so they're underneath something, but it looked like they were going to be fine. And as another person is getting it out, like getting them out of there, he's like, and then like his legs have been impaled, and it's like he's not getting out of this.
Yeah.
And so the guys, the actor's kind of like in shock of like, I can't feel it, and then the actor ends up dying. And you're like, that's so mean. You guys, you finally got a victory, and then that happens. Way to go.
I can't speak much to that because I still haven't watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but I might watch it at some point.
Yeah, it does a really good job. The first season, it's hard pacing, but seasons 2 and then on do a great job, and it just gets better and better each season.
All right, should we jump into trivia?
Let's jump into trivia.
All right, so last week I had a trivia about a New Girl character who I said was an homage to a character from Cheers, which is the character of Coach. So we've talked about this character on Cheers before. The character name is Coach. The character's real name was Ernie Pantuso. And then in New Girl, Coach, there's also a character named Coach, and his first name was Ernie. And they kind of use that as a little homage. Hey, let's have both coaches be Ernie.
Who's that homage? It's Coach.
Yeah. The only similarity they have, because Coach from Cheers is an older, short, white man, and on New Girl, it's a taller, younger black man.
That's true. It is. Yeah. All right. So my trivia, it's going to go back to my number 3, the episode Sweet Surrender. I said that the dad in it was a guest star character. So I want to see who knows without looking it up. Who was that guest star who popped in there? And then if you know the guest star, you know what other stuff he's been in. But what 90s sports movie was he in? So
Elliot Gould.
If you don't know the character, try and get Elliot Gould. You got it. You can try and guess a sports movie and work backwards from there. So
I don't know sports movies.
You would know this one.
I would know this one, huh? Interesting. All right.
Yeah.
So if you know the answer to that one, which I don't, let us know. You can let us know on TV Guys 1 on Twitter. TV Guys on Facebook, tvguyspodcast@gmail.com, or as Matt likes to say every week, just text us.
Yeah. And Brian's number is no. Some of you have it. I'm not going to give it out for those who don't have it. But until next time, hey, have a great Easter. Have an awesome April. We've made it through the first quarter of the year. Good for you. You did it. And until next time, I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
And I'm reminding you to stay tuned and keep watching. Oh, my internet connection is unstable. What's this garbage about? Give me a second. Why are you're unstable?
You're back now.
Connection.